My name is David Daniel Ball, and these are the headlines for Saturday, the 7th of February, 2009. New South Wales health authorities are on heat wave alert. The New South Wales government have not got the necessary infrastructure to handle the heat. Homes on alert as the Victorian fire breaches line. Emissions trading won't hurt inflation, says the Reserve Bank of Australia. In other shock news, Reserve Bank assures Australians that spending is irrelevant to demand. Yeah, I don't believe that either. Sydney's bus no-go zone labelled a New South Wales government failure. Couple reunited with children 20 years after alleged kidnapping. Sydney heat puts stress on elderly and kids. Darcy's death prompts a court review. Victorians warned to keep cool. And in comments, Rudd's welfare state means horror down the track. With 42% of Australian families paying no tax at all, the welfare state mentality being encouraged by the PM is going to be hard to shake, according to Alan Jones. And from Andrew Bolt, we have a column on grants and television leading to more leftist agitprop. It's not just the ABC or SBS. Any broadcaster financed by the government will be captured by the left. High-achieving public servant, leading political activist, and chief executive of the nation's third taxpayer-funded television network, National Indigenous Television, Pat Turner, has many qualities. Self-doubt is apparently not one of them. And for those of you who may ignore the critical point, excusing this breach of charter as merely Territory Aborigines, just calling it as Territory Aborigines see it, let me introduce you to Turner and her National Indigenous Television chairman, Professor Larissa Berndt, another Howard-hating Aboriginal denouncer of the intervention. A vote for Iraqi unity, some good signs in the latest Iraqi elections. Taking their jobs and their tongue. Rod Little in The Spectator explains why British workers are calling wildcat strikes at the Humberside. It's not to save their jobs from the no borders immigration, but to save their identity. Abbott preaches prudence. Frontbencher Tony Abbott, in a fine essay, edges the Liberals closer to the policies they'll have to take up to properly attack Kevin Rudd's economic bungling. It must be no to huge spending, no to new workplace restrictions, and no to emissions trading. No to anything that will cost Australians their jobs. How Rudd designed the package for a spin. The Sydney Morning Herald's Peter Harcher is of course firmly in Kevin Rudd's camp. So when Rudd or his ministers brief him on detail of how they put their $42 billion spending spree together, you can be sure that Hatcher's retelling will be sympathetic, not cynical. Yet his account should nevertheless alarm you in its telling of how Rudd and his team worked on this, and what motivated them precisely to spend so much so quickly on so little that will last. First, there's the usual signs of Rudd rushing, once again deliberately creating an air of quick crisis among sleep-deprived colleagues in which sober second thoughts will inevitably be seen as distracting, fiddling, or even disloyal. But far more worrying is Harcher's inside access account of what influenced the government more than anything in deciding what to spend and when. Terry McCrann notes that Treasury Secretary Ken Henry, in his evidence to the Senate this week, also seemed to have an unnatural fixation on keeping the economy just above the line that's marked recession. Frogs have been robbed. Folks, we have a scandal. New South Wales faces pressure from Commonwealth of Victoria after a leaked scientific report found it had knowingly restricted flows to the Snowy River to a fraction of what is required, turning the river into a tepid chain of sediment and algae-choked pools. That is shocking. For what nefarious purpose did these thieves steal this water, thus imperiling the innocent frogs, water reeds, and fish that should always be our first concern? The water is instead being diverted to the Murray to produce power and irrigate crops. Criminal. Main chances you can believe in. This is becoming a farce. Reporting from Los Angeles and Washington, U.S. Representative Hilda S. Solis, President Obama's choice for Labor Secretary, faced new obstacles after lawmakers who were expected to vote on her confirmation Thursday abruptly canceled the hearing amid reports of back taxes owed by her husband. Add her to the list of Obama's gang of cheats, crooks, and associated wide boys. Charles Krauthammer says the hiring of cheats and influence peddlers is just one of the things that portray Obama as a hypocrite. Here's another. It's the essential fraud of rushing through a bill in which the normal rules, committee hearings, findings, revenue to pay for the programs, are suspended on the grounds that a national emergency requires an immediate job-creating stimulus, and then throwing into it hundreds of billions of dollars that have nothing to do with stimulus, that Congress's own budget office won't be spent until 2011 and beyond, and that are of little more than back-scratching special interest lobby-driven parochialism that Obama came to Washington to abolish, he said. The Japanese curse Ruddonomics. Japan can tell us what happens when you get some Kevin Rudd promising to spend tens of billions of dollars to save his country from an inevitable slowdown. The real difference with Rudd's package lies only in this. Japan at least spent many of its billions on dams and big stuff that last. Kevin Rudd is spending his on pink bats. But killing is killing, isn't it? I understand and share the horror, but wonder why it's so selective. And a reminder, much the same has happened here, of course. I haven't heard of similar tragedies in Victoria, but who could tell? Or perhaps our doctors more routinely do what a doctor at Melbourne's Royal Women's Hospital did to a healthy girl called Jessica, already 32 weeks in the womb, and first killed the fetus with an injection to the heart. The response of Victoria's politicians to that last horror? To pass laws giving doctors more freedom to kill more such children, just days from birth, but properly, of course, in the womb, where we can't see and can pretend the dead child was not quite human. Of course, Obama has passed the same policies. Holding the Lancet survey to account, you'll remember that the Lancet survey that claimed the war in Iraq, thanks to evil George Bush, had killed 98,000 Iraqis in its first year, and that the toll by 2006 had reached 655,000. And remember how the first figure was rushed out just before Bush's 2004 bid for re-election, and the second just before the 2006 congressional elections? Those figures were inherently implausible and were then and later contradicted by almost every other survey or body count around. Naturally, any political hack with a contempt for truth seized on them, never minding that they seemed false. Much of the media simply swallowed the bait, and there was the usual outlets that tried eagerly to rebut the evidence that the study was deeply, deeply flawed. But no one paid a price for injecting such a wildly exaggerated figure into the debate, through the pages of what was ostensibly a leading medical journal operating under the usual structures of peer review and dispassionate scientific method. Better a liar than a fool. Here's one occasion where I hope one of our top Islamic leaders is a liar. He said he had spoken to the state Islamic councils, other Muslim groups, and many imams, and he was confident he represented the mainstream Muslim view. Obama appoints a Flannery. It was bad enough that we had Tim Flannery, our Australian of the Year, for making wild claims like this. I think there's a fair chance Perth will be the 21st century's first ghost metropolis. Worse is that not only does the US have a Tim Flannery of its own, but Barack Obama has made him Secretary of Energy. Here is Stephen Chu in full Flannery. I don't think American public has gripped in its gut what it could happen, he said. We're looking at a scenario where there's no more agriculture in California. And he added, I don't actually see how they can keep their cities going either. Lesson learned, but swiftly forgotten. One green scare starts, another quietly dies. Nuclear reactors are to be built in Sweden for the first time in nearly 30 years after the government decided to abandon a decades-old commitment to phase out the power source. The dramatic policy switch showed that even in a country where popular opinion has been against nuclear power previously, and one with extensive hydroelectric resources, atomic generation is seen as part of an emissions-free energy strategy. How O'Brien mauls or meows. Yesterday, Andrew Bolt contrasted the remarkable aggression with which the ABC's PM this week interviewed Shadow Treasurer Julie Bishop with the softball chat her Labour counterpart Wayne Swan enjoyed that same day and on the same topic on AM. Now, he shows you how the ABC 7:30 report host Kerry O'Brien interviewed both Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull on the same issue, Rudd's $42 billion gamble. I suspect you might find a remarkably pronounced difference in tone and respect. You'll have to click on the link.